This episode of Bulletproof Cash Flow is brought to you by Realty Dynamics. Learn how people like you can build substantial passive income while creating wealth for the long term through real estate investing. Visit rdyne.com. That's RDYNE.com.
You know, every house you buy is a seminar. You learn something from it. And it's more valuable than a seminar because you have money at risk. You have your time at risk. You remember those lessons. You know, you remember a lesson where you have something to lose and where there's some risk involved. You remember that. And so you really learn something from that. You may read a book, you may take a seminar, you may learn something, but until you go out and apply it, and you're in the field and you can feel it and you take a risk. You sign the papers, you own something, and now it's yours. It's really not meaningful to you. So I encourage people, again, to get started with a house because it's the simplest thing you can buy. It's the simplest thing you can buy. It's the safest thing you can buy. And even if you lose a little bit of money, it still taught you a lesson, you know.
Working because you want to, not because you have to, is financial freedom. And we want to help you create that. Welcome to the Bulletproof Cash Flow Show. We're going to teach you how to achieve lifetime financial freedom through real estate investment. Your host is a multifamily syndicator and property developer. He's done deals reaching into the hundreds of millions of dollars. You'll hear from experts in all aspects of real estate investment, finance, development, and management. Everything you need is right here. This is the Bulletproof Cash Flow Show. And this is your host, Augustino Pintus.
Hey everyone, it's Augustino. When it comes to building cash flow and wealth, real estate is what I consider to be the best way, although I may be a little biased. Now, I know we often talk about doing massive multifamily deals and complex deal structures, but other people out there are either looking for something a little more accessible or more realistic for people to grow long-term wealth, or maybe to even add single family as a way to bring in more cash flow into their household. Now, today's guest knows the subject of single family very, very well. He is an investor, coach, and author, and he's been this for over 5 decades. And he says that the fundamental strategies from back then are still pretty much the same. Now, he has prospered during 7 recessions, numerous tax law changes, and interest rates ranging from under 3% to 16% in his 40-plus year career as a real estate investor. Now, his best-selling book, Building Wealth One House at a Time, has helped more than 100,000 real estate enthusiasts on their way to successful real estate investing. Now, with all that, I'd like to welcome John Schaub to the show. John, thanks for coming on.
Good morning. Happy to be here.
Yes, I'm glad to have you on. Now, guys, if you like what John has to say, you can reach him via his contact page at johnschaub.com. Okay, John, go ahead and tell listeners a little bit about your backstory. How did you get started in all this real estate stuff?
Well, when I was a kid, 16, 17, 18 years old, I was doing construction work and digging ditches. And one day, the fellow who ran the real estate office where I was working asked me to watch the shop while he took lunch break. And while I was watching the shop, somebody came along and wanted to buy one of the lots. So I said, well, give me your name and give me $100 and we'll make a deal. So he did. And when the salesman came back, I said, I sold a lot. He said, you did what? I said, well, I know these lots better than you do. I'm out there clearing them all day long. And so he gave me that $100 tip for finding that buyer and putting that deal together while he was at lunch. I said, $100 is more than I make in 2 weeks. And I made it in an hour. I said, this is a good business. So I started studying. I went to college. I studied real estate. I got a degree. While I was in college, I managed a little apartment building, 6-unit building. And by managing, I mean, I painted it, I plumbed it, fixed the plumbing, I mowed the grass, I rented it to people. And that was a really good experience. And I encourage people right now, if you've never done anything in a real estate business and want to get started, get a job like that. Try to manage something small so it's not too scary, but get some hands-on management experience so you get to meet tenants and talk to them and see how they act and what they react to and learn a little bit about maintenance. So anyway, long story short, guy showed up and wanted to buy that building. So I sold that building and pocketed about a $5,000 commission. This is while I was at school. And I took that money and immediately went out and learned how to fly and bought my airplane not long after that. And I've owned an airplane ever since. I love to fly. And another lesson in life, I think, is if you have a hobby that's expensive, it motivates you to go to work. So, boats, airplanes, cars. I have a lot of toys. I enjoy toys. I have 3 kids and 5 grandkids. We enjoy traveling together. We're all going skiing together. So doing fun stuff that's expensive sometimes, but spending money motivates you to make more money, I think. So it kind of keeps you from getting lazy after you started making money.
That's right.
Fast forward a little bit. After I got out of college, I got in the land sales business. I sold a bunch of lots. I started buying land. I started buying apartments. I bought a motel. I bought a big apartment building. I bought a bunch of duplexes. I was buying anything I could buy. I didn't have much income. I was a young guy. I was in my early 20s. But if I could find a seller who would finance something for me, I'd buy it. I wouldn't look too hard. I'd just buy it and hope that I could sell it for more. Well, that didn't turn out to be a real strong strategy, because when you own apartment building, duplex, motel, commercial buildings, a little bit of everything, you don't get very good at managing any one thing. So I started studying. I took other people's classes. I read books, and I latched on to a couple of people who've been very successful in business in this town and studied them. And they weren't telling me much, but I studied what they did. And there's 2 things that stood out to me. One was they held property for a long period of time. They didn't just buy and sell it. They weren't flippers. They were long-term investors. So they'd hold stuff for 10 or 20 or 30 years. And when they sold it, they'd sell it for a lot of money. It wouldn't be just a little bit, it'd be a lot, or they wouldn't sell it at all. I had a good friend who's a neighbor of ours who would walk by my house every day, and I'd walk with him sometimes. He owned 4 or 5 properties in our town that he'd owned for 30 or 40 years. He wouldn't sell them. He leased the land to people who built big buildings on them. So he had land leases under these big buildings. And, he didn't do any work at all. He just cashed his check every month as it came in. Bank of America paid him, big businesses paid him money because he was a long-term holder. And he bought that land for not much money years ago, but he held it for sometimes sat empty for 30 years before they would build a building on it. So I learned that the people that accumulated a lot of money had a long-term perspective. I started transitioning in the house business by accident. I bought my first house in 1973. I still have it. And at that time, I was buying anything. But then I noticed that my house tenants were so much easier to manage than my apartment tenants, and certainly easier than my motel tenants who only stayed one day. So I started thinking about how can I simplify things and work less and make more money. That's kind of my strategy, because I like to play. So I want more time to play, less time to work. And so I started buying more houses. And we had a couple of recessions. We had a really good recession in the mid 70s, and I bought a bunch of houses. And we had one in the early 80s, and I bought a bunch more houses. And every time we'd have a downturn, I'd buy a bunch of houses. And eventually I sold and exchanged all the other properties I had, and ended up just with a portfolio of houses. And I'll tell you why I like the houses better than everything else. There's a couple things. Number one is the tenant that I get. When I manage apartment buildings, and I always manage my own property, I still do. I manage all my own houses myself. When I manage properties, you learn how people treat them and what they think about when what they think about the landlord. And an apartment tenant thinks the landlord is loaded. Well, I remember one building I bought with nothing down. It had negative cash flow when it was full. I wasn't loaded. I thought I bought this thing below the market. So I thought I had about $100,000 profit in it, but I wasn't making any money on a monthly basis. And if I didn't collect all the rent, I wasn't eating that month. So I've got to work hard to make it work. So I didn't have a lot of money, but my tenants thought I had a lot of money. I drive in and try to collect all the rent in this building, and the tenants had bigger television sets than I did. They were drinking better beer than I had. They had nicer cars than I had, but they weren't paying the rent. They were giving me stories. So I had to fight for the rent. And I said, life is too short to fight for rent. And I never had a building that was big enough to hire professional management. We can talk about that later. But my buildings were all smaller buildings that I managed myself. And I just found it to be a lot of work because my tenants would not stay long term. They would move in and out in a year or two. And every time they moved out, we'd have to do some work to the apartments. And it would take a while to re-rent them and put a new tenant in there. My house tenants, on the other hand, my average house tenant today stays more than 10 years. I have somebody moving out right now that's been with me 16 years. I have somebody else with me 26 years. I got people with me more than 30 years. If you compare that to a tenant that moves out every year or two, you can see how your workload is reduced a lot. But other things are happening too. You don't have any vacancies. So your vacancy expense or you're not collecting rent that day goes way, way down. When a tenant stays for 16 years, just imagine how much money they've made you with no vacant days for 16 years. For 16 years, you do very little maintenance on that house. Now, when they move out, you've got to do some maintenance. Right now, I'm told you I'm going out and see that house after we talk here. I'm going to jump in my boat and drive to it because I live on the water and this house is also on the water, so I can do my water taxi routine. I've got 3 guys working out there, and we'll get the house knocked out this week. But it needed a lot of work. We'll probably spend $8,000, $9,000, $10,000 on this house to put it back in really nice shape again. But it's gone up a lot, and for 16 years, I haven't done anything to it. So, if you can buy something and not do much for 16 years, that's a heck of an investment, especially if it's in a town that's appreciating. I'm fortunate enough to live in Sarasota, Florida, and it's an area that's growing. People keep moving here. So prices keep going up. But, prices go up everywhere if you just look at inflation. The value of the dollar keeps going down. If you've been around for a while, you know what it used to cost to buy things, and you know what it costs today. The dollar's not worth as much. So when you buy real estate, even if the real estate is not going up a lot in value, your investment is going up in price because the dollar to value goes down. So, if you buy something, and I've seen ours average about 5% a year for 50 years here. So you could buy something and hold on to it for a while. And my rule of thumb is to hold on to it till it doubles. And sometimes that takes 12 years. Sometimes it happens in 5 or 6 years. Sometimes it takes 20 years. Depends on what you buy. And of course, some things go up more than others. And that's another reason that I'm in the house business is I can cherry pick what I buy. I don't have a lot of money in any one house, but I can be really picky about what I buy, and I am. So you made a comment before we started here that it's hard to buy. Well, I don't care. I'm not trying to buy 20 houses this year. If I buy a house this year, it'll be a bargain, and it'll be in the right place, and it'll be right in the right house. And by that, I mean, it'll be a house that'll rent to somebody who will stay there for a long time, 10 or 20 years. And during that period of time, it'll double in value at least once, maybe twice. And I know that because I buy in my market. I know my market. I have owned property in 10 states. I've owned property in many cities in those states. I have decided that wasn't real strong strategy because I didn't know those markets as well as I know my market. So if you live in a town and you know the market and you know neighborhoods, you know where growth is happening, you can tell a neighborhood where people are moving into that neighborhood. Your town may not be growing, but certain neighborhoods are doing better than others. And if you can identify those neighborhoods where people are going in and remodeling houses and tearing down old houses and building new houses, those houses will appreciate. Those neighborhoods will appreciate just because when somebody comes in and builds a new house next to somebody else's house, everything goes up a little bit. I was involved with Habitat for Humanity for more than 25 years on their board, and we would go in and build in some of the roughest neighborhoods in this town. And in every town, I built in Cleveland, in every town. And what happens is when you build a brand new house next to somebody who's got an older house, they tend to fix their house up a little bit. They'll paint it, they'll clean up the yard, the whole neighborhood gets better. So you look for neighborhoods where that's happening. Even in a town that's not going up much, you'll find that your house will go up more than average. And that's what you're looking for. People might say the average only goes up 4%. And I say, well, I don't want to be average. I want to beat the averages. I want to buy a house a little bit below the market. And I want to buy a house that I know I can rent and in a market that probably has a better than average chance of appreciation. And, if that's your attitude, it's a fairly passive investment. And it's a great way. You mentioned it's a great way to get started because I've had many students go on and do fabulous things. I've got people come back that are billionaires to the class. So when you do a whole bunch of stuff, that's wonderful. But most people start with the building blocks of the house because you learn the business by buying a house and learning how to manage it and understanding financing. And then you might go on to something bigger if you want to, and that's fine. But I can tell you that I have students that have 1,000 houses. If you have a large house portfolio, and I don't have any place near that, and I don't want that many houses. I don't want that many moving parts. I don't want to work that hard. When I had a lot of houses, I had a full-time staff. I had 3 people working for me full-time. Now I just do it by myself. My wife and I work together, but we don't work much. It's not a 40-hour-a-week job. It's a couple-hour-a-week job to manage a pretty nice-sized portfolio. So you have to think about where you want to be in 10 years and what you want to own in 10 years. because most of us in the real estate business have seen times where you just can't sell. Sometimes it's easy to buy, but hard to sell. This is a time where it's pretty easy to sell and it's kind of hard to buy. And you figure out what cycle you're in, but then you plan where you want to be in 10, 15, 20 years. I've always had a 10 or 20 year plan and then work toward that plan, and in my book, I talk about a 10-year plan about getting houses free and clear over a 10-year period of time. And most people, if they had 10 houses free and clear, and I talk about buying one house a year, nothing fancy, one house a year, holding on to it, paying the debt down, and then eventually selling some houses off and paying off other houses. It's not complicated at all. But by doing that, I've got thousands of students that call me that now own their 10 houses free and clear. And these are happy people. 10 houses free and clear, that's not Learjet money, but that's enough money to do a lot of stuff. You don't have to rely on the government for a check each month. And you'll have more money than all your friends, I can tell you that. So I'll take a breath here and see if I've inspired any questions.
Absolutely. Well, so one thing I did notice is that you are a long-term holder. Similar strategy to what we employ. We don't flip our stuff. We're not looking to do anything like that. We're also the long-term strategy play.
Yeah.
And like you said too, you focus on one market. And that is absolutely huge. All I focus on is Cleveland, Northeast Ohio. That's it. That's all I do. Right.
Good.
Pretty soon we're going to be doing Sarasota, but I used to live out there. So I kind of know the market, and we're doing more development type of stuff, development and multifamily, But the one thing that you mentioned, which requires a little bit of emphasis, as a guy that's owned both multifamily and single family, even today, I still own both these two assets. There is a very distinct difference in the tenants that live at each one. The folks that live in the apartments, they do treat it like this is a short-term thing, where the people that live in a home, they turn it into a home. Like it really is a home, much like probably the houses like you and I grew up in. I lived in my house my entire childhood, basically, so it's kind of, I think that there's that whole nesting scenario that comes with as an advantage, a huge advantage for single family homes, even better than duplexes for that matter, because duplexes are still treated like apartments, even though it's only 2 units. Would you say that's true?
You got a neighbor right next door. In the house, you have a yard around you. In my houses, and we're lucky enough to live in a house where there's subdivision with kind of normal size lots, so people have a little grass around them, a little privacy, and people really value that. That's a big thing. Let me just make one other point so I don't forget to make it. The other reason I like houses is the liquidity factor. You never know what's going to happen to you. You never know what's going to happen to the economy. I know that it's easier to sell a house than almost anything else you can own. I've been in the land business. I've owned apartments. I've owned commercial stuff. And I know when you go to sell one of those things, especially if we're in a high interest rate or in a recession or something, it's really hard to get rid of them because nobody wants to buy land in a recession. We've had auctions and nobody came, But the house business, there's always somebody that wants to buy a house, always. And what I talk about and what I teach people to do is finance the houses when you sell them. If you can sell a house to somebody with a down payment that they have and carry back a note, or sell to them on a lease option where you don't even transfer title, you can give them a good deal and make a terrific deal for yourself. Because the cost of the sale is so low. So there's an easy way to transition out of this business at some point when you want to retire, and everybody's going to retire someday. You don't have to own them forever, but there are some houses, having said that, there are some houses I'll own forever. I've got houses that I really like. The tenants like them better than I do. I have tenants that spent $15,000 or $20,000 improving their house. I mean, it's just amazing what they'll do if they make that transition that you just talked about, where they consider it their home and it's a nesting thing. And people ask, why would they do that? Well, some people just don't want the responsibility of ownership. Most of the people that have rented from me have owned something at one point in their lives or not. Sometimes they've lost them in foreclosure or short sales. Other times they just moved on, and they want this house, they want that size house, and they'll take good care of it. So we've got a lot of folks who are, in the third half of their life, and they take good care of those houses, and they're great tenants.
Yeah, excellent. Now, One thing that you also emphasized was, and I heard this, and we talked about this in the green room too, is it sounds like creative financing. Now, I mentioned Carlton Sheets, and he was one of your students, which is interesting because
right.
Carlton Sheets has been around for a long time. I'm sure many of the people that might be listening have no idea who Carlton Sheets even is. You can Google him. You'll see who he is, right? But he was an educator that really focused on creative financing. I think early on, it sounded like you did a lot of creative financing type scenarios where you're either having the seller hold a note or doing other methods. Is that outlined in your 9-step program? I know in the book you talk about a 9-step program. Is that outlined as one of the things?
Yeah, I talk about a number of ways to buy. Here's an interesting fact. I have never gone to the bank to borrow money to buy a house. Never. I've always financed houses either with sellers or with investors putting up some money. So if you don't have credit and you don't have much of a down payment, you can still buy a house. You just have to buy from somebody who doesn't want that house. And so when you first start, you end up maybe buying houses that you don't like much either. The houses that people will give you are generally not the prettiest house on the block and maybe not in the right block. But that's not a bad way to get started because you do learn. Every house you buy is a seminar. You learn something from it. And it's more valuable than a seminar because you have money at risk. You have your time at risk. You remember those lessons. You remember a lesson where you have something to lose and where there's some risk involved. You remember that. And so you really learn something from that. You may read a book, you may take a seminar, you may learn something, but until you go out and apply it, and you're in the field and you can feel it and you take a risk, you sign the papers, you own something, and now it's yours. It's really not meaningful to you. So I encourage people, again, to get started with a house because it's the simplest thing you can buy. It's the simplest thing you can buy. It's the safest thing you can buy. And even if you lose a little bit of money, it still taught you a lesson, and you won't lose money if you have this attitude that I'm going to hold it. I'm going to hold this house until it goes up in value. I'm going to hold it until it doubles if you follow my advice. So if you buy a house today for $200 and you hold it till it doubles, you're going to make $200,000. It may take you a long time to do that, but that's still a lot of money. If it takes 15 years, that's still a chunk of change for most people. And probably with the way the economy is going, you're going to make more money than that.
Well, because of all the inflation that's kicking in right now,
the government's spending a lot of money right now. And we have a housing shortage. We've had a housing shortage for a long time, but we really have a housing shortage now.
Yeah. Why do you think that is? I mean, I know down in Florida, there's this mass migration that's taking place there, which is going to make finding deals, I think, that much more difficult. But as you pointed out earlier, you're trying to find the right deal. So you don't care how many deals you're going to pass up. But I would imagine too, a lot of competition for those assets, right? And trying to apply creative financing around that is even tougher. Would you say that, or?
Well, I don't buy when there's competition. I never compete against another buyer to buy a house. If I'm not the only game in town, I'm not buying. So I'm looking for situations where there is no competition. Okay. And just for example, I can buy and close on a house in one day. I can go buy and close on a house in 1 hour. If you come to my office, we can sign papers right here and I can buy your house without ever talking to the bank, without ever doing anything that most people do. So I don't worry about hedge funds. They're not my competition. I don't worry about other buyers. Most buyers cannot move that fast. And when somebody decides to sell a house that day, the last house I bought, a guy called me up, said, I need to sell my house right away. I said, come on in. He came in. I bought his house here in the office. His wife had told him he needed to get rid of that house that day. But there's not too many people who can buy a house in a day. I can't. So if you learn how to buy outside the banking system without going down and applying for a loan and waiting for the appraisal and waiting for loan approval and all that, which takes a lot of time, even in today's market where things are speedier than they used to be, still takes weeks or maybe months. Some people can't wait that long. I'm looking for the guy who doesn't want to wait that long, or the banker who doesn't want to wait that long, or the private lender who doesn't want to wait that long. So, I'm not competing with other people when I buy property. If you and I show up at the same property, I'm going to say, you can have it. And then I'll tell the seller, if you can't sell it to them, call me, And that's what I tell brokers. I say, if you can't sell this to anybody else, you call me and I'll buy it. So I have no competition at that point.
I think the advantage, though, and you pointed this out earlier, is because the market, what a roof would cost, what to clear a sewer line would be, things you can't see, right? That's especially those types of things. If you have aluminum wiring or not, you can tell by the era of the property. It's like, okay, if this thing was built in the 60s, I think they used aluminum wiring in Sarasota, right? I think everybody was. It was a national thing.
Yeah, my house has aluminum wiring. We've had it for 40 years. No problem so far.
Yeah. So
things like that scare some people, but it's just if you're an electrician, you say, not that big a deal as long as you don't do something stupid. But the other thing I tell realtors is I buy about half my property through real estate brokers. They like me because they get paid today. They bring it to me. We close in a hurry. They bring me deals that their listing's about to expire. They haven't been able to sell it at all, or they bring me a deal that they just listed and they don't want to tell anybody else about it. Now think of it. I don't know if you're a broker or not, if you have an agent license, but agents who list something and they know it's going to sell right away have listed something under the market. If they list a $400,000 house for $300,000, they know it's going to sell right away. Their greatest fear is somebody else is going to sell it and they're only going to get half the commission. They want the whole commission. They bring me that deal because they know I'll buy it right now. They'll get their full commission and we'll close. We won't close today, but we'll close next week or the week after. They'll get paid right away. So you make friends out of brokers. You make friends. You develop connections. You develop relationships with people, both your tenants, the people that do work for you. I've got a bunch of people working on this empty house I've got that we'll get it done real fast because they show up. They know I pay them well. And I pay them on time. So it's the relationships you build over time that are so valuable.
Yeah, excellent. So, and I'm assuming that you're using actual cash. You're not using like a self-directed IRA or anything else like that. You're using real money. You have cash, a cash account sitting right here in the bank. Somebody could just roll right up and just stroke them a check or just hand them cash right into their hand. I would assume this is what it sounds like.
The guy who came in and sold me that house today had a big mortgage at Chase Bank. I took over his mortgage. I gave him a note for his equity and I gave him $5,000.
Okay. I got it.
Didn't take a lot of cash.
Right.
I like to buy, my student, Bob Allen, wrote a book called Nothing Down based on our course years and years ago.
Yeah.
I talked to in that class, I talk about, and I still teach once a year sometimes, and I'll talk about a lot of the deals that we've made. And a lot of them are just like that, where somebody is ready to sell, they're leaving town, or their spouse told them to get rid of it, and they're ready. Today's the day they want to make a deal. And when you find that person, you don't have to be a cash buyer. You don't have to compete with the hedge funds where you have to write a check for $300,000. You buy creatively, as you pointed out. There's a lot of creative ways to make a deal other than writing a check. Writing a check is the least creative thing you can do. And it's really the highest risk thing you can do. Because when you pay all cash for a house and then you find the sewer line's bad or something else is bad, it's all yours. There's nobody to talk to.
Yeah, that's right. Now,
foreclosure sales is the riskiest thing you can do. People say, well, I'm going to go out and buy a foreclosure. I said, have you ever done that before? Say, you don't know what you're getting. You don't know if anything in that house is going to work. And you're going to find a lot of surprises probably after you buy it. And it's all cash. If you've got a problem, it's all yours. So.
I'm glad you mentioned that because I get so many people that say that they want to get started in the real estate business and they're going to go to some foreclosure auction and do all that. And I'm like, oh man, that for the same reason you just pointed out, it's like, you have no idea what's going on at that house. You have no idea what the history is. It could have been a one of these, like a grower house, right? So
meth house.
Whatever. It's like, you can't do anything with that. I mean, because
even worse than that, people will buy stuff. I've got students in California that'll buy things in Cleveland and they've never been to Cleveland and they'll buy them from some guy who's selling them something. I said, you need to go to Cleveland and look at the house before you buy it. You have no idea what you're buying. They'll show them a picture. I said, it may not even be the right house.
Yeah.
So,
I often think though, it's because everybody's so caught up on getting in cheap, and use the air quotes cheap. And I always counter with, well, you get what you pay for. If you pay 10, 15 grand more on a house, which isn't much, when you spread it over 30 years, you're getting a better quality home and potentially a better neighborhood. And you could charge more money in rent and it works out way better. And the differential over time is very small. If you think about it.
The price you pay is not that important at all. What is important is what you buy, how long you're willing to hold it. So you want to make sure that you want to manage this house for a long time or whatever it is. To buy an apartment building, make sure you want to manage it for a long time. And the terms, if you have terms you can afford. And if you use investor money or if you take over existing bank financing, or heaven help you if you go down to the bank and apply for a loan and get one. I mean, good luck if you can. But you'll find even if you do go down to the bank and get that first loan, the second loan will be a little harder to get. Pretty soon they'll say no more loans. because they don't like real estate investors. They don't like somebody that owns 30 or 40 houses. Then they won't lend me any money, and I don't want any of their money. But I mean, I can't qualify for a loan, and I own dozens of houses free and clear, and I got lots of money in the bank, but they still don't understand.
Right. That's right.
But I don't borrow from banks, so it's not a big deal.
Yeah.
But back to the liquidity thing. One more thing on the liquidity side. When you sell a house to somebody, you want to sell a house to a person who wants to live in that house, who can go down to the bank and get an owner-occupied loan. Okay? That's a very important point. When I sell my apartment buildings or my commercial buildings or my anything else, I'm never selling to somebody who wants to live there, who can go down to the bank and get an owner-occupied loan. If they get a bank loan, it's going to be an investor loan, okay? Commercial loan, short fuse, high interest rates, a lot of things that are different than getting a residential loan. That owner-occupied residential loan, if they're a veteran, they get 100% loan. FHAVA, 97% loan. Just conventional, 95 or 90% loan. They can borrow a ton of money, which gives you the option to sell for all cash. Mm-hmm. Why is that important? Because you may change your mind. You may say, I don't want this house anymore. I want to buy something else. But you've got a big gain in it and you don't want to pay taxes. Well, if you can do a sale and get all cash, you can do a 1031 exchange into other properties and not pay taxes. So the secret of acquiring a lot of wealth is pushing that tax payment off, pushing the taxes you owe down the road as far as you can, and maybe you'll never pay them. Maybe you'll just die. And that's my strategy. At some point, I'll own a lot of property. I'll die. My kids will inherit it. Whether or not we have stepped up basis by then, we won't know. But there'll be somebody else's problem. But I won't pay the tax during my lifetime. And I have the benefit of all that income and all that growth during my lifetime.
That's right. That's how you build generational wealth.
That's how you build a lot of wealth.
That's right. That's right. Now, I mentioned this at the beginning. You've been through a lot of recessions, a lot of changes in laws and all kinds of banking changes, all kinds of things. What do you attribute your success to be? Like, how were you able to hang on to everything you've done so far?
Oh, just keep moving. When things get tough, I remember my first recession, which was 1973, and I would just get going. And I had just bought my first house, and I had some duplexes and some other properties. So things were real thin. When property values dropped, they didn't go up; they just went down a little bit. So now I'm looking at properties where I really didn't have any equity at all, but they were full, and the people were paying the rent, and I had enough income to make my payments, so I was able to survive. Just hold on. If I was in the land business, I'd have gone out of business because nobody was buying land for years, and unless you've got deep pockets, you can't afford just to own a piece of land for years and pay the taxes and the interest on the debt and then survive. But in the income producing business, and fortunately, I moved from land to income producing at that point. You have the cash flow coming in, so you can survive until things clear up again and go back up. Go back and look at charts of property values in your town, and you will see, they're kind of a stair-step thing. They go up. Sometimes they come down, but they go up, then they go up, and they go up. They kind of keep going up over a long period of time. You just have to be able to stay in a long period of time. That's Warren right. Buffett, I've read all of Warren's books. Everybody knows what Warren is. But he says, buy something that's good and hold it. He doesn't say steal it. He just says, buy something good and hold it. And the first house I ever bought, I bought in 1973. I paid too much for it. I had a 7% interest rate loan, owner financing. The seller carried back a note for me, which wasn't cheap. 7% was kind of normal back then. I had a 20-year term on it, which is okay, but nothing special. And that house didn't make any money for the first few years because, I made a 20% down payment, which is a large down payment when you think about it, which I borrowed from one of my salesmen because I didn't have the 20%. So I borrowed everything. But I was in that house and I still own that house. It's been my best investment ever because I still own it, 47 years or 48 years later. So if you'll own something for a long period of time, the numbers are just remarkable. The amount of money, the return on your investment is remarkable. And it makes it easy. I've had 2 tenants in that house, and all that time, I've had one half tenant for over 30 years in that house. Well, it's like a mutual fund. You just buy it and you shove it, put it on the shelf, and you just forget about it. You work 1 hour a year on a house like that. It's a terrific investment. So think that way. Think long term. Don't worry about recessions too much. I'm hoping for a recession. When recessions come along, I get to do 2 things. I get to buy cheap, and I get to lend people money at high interest rates. I won't lend money today. People want to pay 5 or 6 or 7%. That's not enough to get me excited. and they want to borrow it all. They want to borrow 100% of the purchase price, which I won't do. But when we have a recession, the last recession we had, people were coming to me and paying me 16 and 18% because they were buying things for 50 cents on the dollar. They would buy something that's worth 300 for 150. Well, now I'll loan them the 150 because I know it's a bargain, right? And they're willing to pay the high interest rates because they know they bought something 150 below the market. Well, that's when you lend money. I'm in the lending business as well as the house buying business, the house management business, but we do everything in cycles. You do the smart thing today based on what the market's doing today.
Now, I know every situation is unique. What are your general impressions about the next recession? I think people were projecting we'd be in a recession by now, but it's a little funky these days, right? I think that there's a whole lot of, it's a very different time. You've been through a lot of recessions. There's certain things that you might see similarities. What do you think? I mean, are we close to a recession? Are we hitting the top, or is it still going to go on for a long time?
Well, the thing I've noticed about every recession we've ever had is I haven't predicted it. I haven't guessed they were coming. If I guessed, I was wrong. It's really hard to predict when something's going to happen. And people predict all the time, of course. And the old adage in newsletter business is predict often. You'll
never be wrong.
Eventually, you're going to be right. So, I can predict that we're going to have a recession next year. I have no idea if we do. Nobody does. Generally, it's some black swan event that just sneaks up on us that we don't anticipate that causes any recessions. Nobody anticipated 2 years of a bull market real estate 2 years ago. I guarantee you. I have a group of my guys, and we ski together every year. We've been skiing together for 30 years out in Aspen. And we sat around the room in February 2 years ago and said, what do you think next year's going to be like? And everybody thought it was going to be really slow. Well, they were all wrong. And these guys all own lots of property. I mean, every one of them have $10 million or more. And nobody knew, and nobody knows today. So I can't predict, but one thing I'm consistent on is when I think something's going to happen, it doesn't happen. So, you just stay balanced. You say, look, no matter what happens, I want to be able to survive. And if we have a recession and prices get cheap and people are giving houses away, I want to be in a position where I can pick up some of those houses. And let me tell you, you don't need any money to pick them up when the recession. They just give them to you. But what's important is if you already own real estate is you want to make sure it stays full. You don't want a bunch of empty houses when people have lost their jobs. And when you have 15% unemployment in your town, you don't want to have vacancies because they're hard to rent. So you want to have long-term tenants who like your houses. And, the way I compete with hedge funds in my town, and they own a lot of property around here because Sarasota is a very popular place, but they rent them for, they squeeze every dollar they can out of the rent. They're renting $2,200 a month for a house that I rent for $1,750. Same house right next door. So who's going to lose their tenant during a recession? They are, not me. I'm going to stay full. My people will not move during a recession. And when they get that $2,200 rent, they only get it for 1 year because those people move out and look for something cheaper. My people stay for 15 or 20 years. So my net is higher than their net. And they haven't figured that out yet. And they probably won't figure it out because they're going to throw the bean counters are in charge and they're trying to squeeze every nickel out of that house they can. And that's really not good strategy long term. That doesn't work real well in the real estate business. You're better off keeping people long term, keeping your expenses down, not having vacancies.
Yep. Now, what would you say is the worst mistake you've ever made in this business?
Gosh, do we have another hour? I made a lot of mistakes. If you're not making mistakes, you're not doing anything. I've read all of John Wooden's books too. I'm a basketball player, so John Wooden was the most famous basketball coach ever. And he said the team that makes the most mistakes will win. Okay, so I said, let's go out and make a mistake and see, and then we can work our way to get out of it. And I had a good friend, the guy who started Habitat. He said, let's create a crisis and solve it. And that's good strategy. It's offensive strategy. I'm not a defensive player. I'm an offensive player. So I want to be, I want to go out and always trying to make a deal. But I've gotten in deal. A couple things we did wrong early on is we got in business with other people. There were four of us that went together and bought a piece of land that was a foreclosure from a bank. And all four of these guys are really smart. All the other three smarter than I am, all had more money than I had. We didn't make any money on that land at all because nobody did anything. We just sat and watched the other guy and hoped they would do something. Putting together groups, even of really smart people, doesn't make a lot of sense. So I a long time ago learned that if I'm going to put together a group, it's going to be a small group. It's going to be 2 people, me and somebody else. Okay. And if somebody else is they're bringing to the table is money. I'll do all the work. I'll find a deal. I'll structure it. I'll manage it. I'll sell it. You put up the money and we'll split the profits 50-50. And people say 50-50, that's a lot. I said, your return with 50% is going to be better than you've ever made on anything in your life, because we'll go buy it below the market, manage it well, and sell it for a nice profit. So these guys are making 20-25% of their money, which is really good return. And of course, my return is infinite because I don't have any money in the deal. So I can't go wrong. But I don't get paid until they get paid. I don't get paid until we make a profit. I don't take commissions. I don't take part of the gross. I take nothing until we make a profit. So it's a different strategy than most people use. But it's very powerful because people like it. They like the idea that I'm not taking commissions. I'm not taking part of the rent. We're sharing it. We own these things 50-50. And it's a longer conversation than that, but it's a good way to structure things.
Yeah. Well, finding the right partners, everything. I learned my lesson early on too, just like you did, to find the right partners. And yes, fortunately I have now. So we have to go through, kiss a lot of frogs. That's what I did. I kissed a bunch of them. So
I tell my kids, who you marry, who you get in business with, these are some of the biggest decisions you'll ever make. Be very careful. Do it right the first time. You don't have to do it again.
That's right. So, John, we covered a lot of stuff and would love to talk another hour, but I know we're out of time here. So if you had one piece of bulletproof advice for our listeners, what would you tell them?
Well, to buy something that you want to hold for the rest of your life. Just think that way. You probably won't hold it the rest of your life. You probably sell it, but think that way. Think about a long-term strategy, and then get into it deep enough to say, okay, who am I going to rent it to? Will I like these people? How am I going to finance it? If I'm going to own it for long-term, what makes sense? So do everything right to start with, and don't be in a hurry. Be patient about that first deal. A lot of times, people who come to my class or read my book will take more than a year to make their first deal, and that's okay. Don't be in a hurry. Be patient. It's like fishing. You got to wait till you get the right one on. And so study the business. It's simple. Reading my book, Building Wealth One House at a Time. Everybody loves that book. You can read the reviews on Amazon, but it's a great book. It'll help you get going in the right direction. It'll help you make some money.
Excellent. All right, guys, if you want to reach out to John, reach him via his website, johnschaub.com. Hope you got some insight on how to get into single families and some of the huge benefits that come along with it. Don't forget to check out his website. He's got a lot of great material there as well. He's got events that crank out every so often. You may want to sit in on some of that information as well. I think you're going to get a lot of benefit from that. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next episode. Take care.
You've been listening to the Bulletproof Cash Flow Show. We hope you've enjoyed the show. We know we had fun. Make sure to visit our Apple Podcast page and leave us a 5-star review. We hope you've gotten some useful and practical information from the show. For real estate coaching, events, and resources, head up bulletproofcashflow.com. Till next time.
No information in this episode should be considered specific, personal, or professional advice. Any investment opportunities mentioned on this show are limited to accredited or sophisticated investors. Any investments will only be made with proper disclosure and subscription documentation and subject to all applicable laws. Please consult an appropriate tax, legal, real estate, financial, or business professional for individualized advice.